Hi, it's a beautiful spring day in the Champlain Valley, and we're at Red Rocks Park in South Burlington, and we're going on a wildflower walk. I have with me Newcomb's Wildflower Guide. I have a hand lens to use to look closely at the flowers. I also have binoculars because we might run into birds, and I never want to miss the warblers when they're coming through this time of year. We've chosen Red Rocks because the wildflowers bloom all along the trails here, especially up near the cliff, and they're easy to see, and because it's a south-facing area, it's warmer and drier. So my name's Alicia Daniel. I'm the Executive Director of Vermont Master Naturalist. Come join me and let's see what we find today. So I want to tell you a little bit about Newcomb's Wildflower Guide. I love this guide. Whenever I travel elsewhere in the world, I wished I had a guide like this one to use there. It's so useful. It's a key, and I would highly recommend that you start out reading the front of the book so that you get a sense of how Lawrence Newcomb set this up. But for us right now, I just will walk you through these 3 choices that you need to make. The first one is flower type. Right now we can see that this flower has 3 parts. So if the bloom was gone, we could still use the bracts or sepals, to make this distinction. So 3 parts. It has opposite or whorled leaves, and they're entire, which mean they have a smooth margin. So we've made our 3 choices. I'll let you walk through the other choices once you get this book. But for now, it gives us a number that is 3, 4, 2. And that is a group number, so it takes us inside the key. And sometimes once you find that number, there are still a few other things you will need to key out. But in this case, 342 takes us right to page 124. So we'll flip into 124 and we'll see what we find. It's always a little bit of an exciting moment to see if this worked for us. And so holding my breath here as I'm on. Yes! So we're at the trilliums, and this is a trillium. It's the one called Wake Robin or Red Trillium. It has broader leaves than the white trillium. These flowers are found higher up in the mountains than the white trilliums that I hope we'll also get to see today. Just to know that today I won't be covering medicinal properties of plants or any of their edible properties, partly because I don't pick wildflowers. They've taken a long time to get reestablished. Most of our forests were cleared. About 80% of our forests were gone 100 years ago. They are a woodland wildflower, and they've had to come back from that. So I leave them where they are. I'm trying to find ones right along the trail so you can see them without disturbing their habitat. So the trillium, though, if you were going to pick flowers, this isn't one you would choose because it's another name for it is stinking Benjamin. If you take it inside, it smells up your whole house. The reason the trillium use that scent is that they are interested in attracting carrion flies, things that are attracted to meat on the ground, and that's how they get pollinated. We're out in Red Rocks today, and Red Rocks is a public park in the city of South Burlington, and I welcome you to come here. It's a great place to see wildflowers. They're all along the trails. They'd actually be in the trails if we hadn't made the trails and walked on the trails, so they really would cover this landscape. And for that reason, in part, I definitely in public parks try to stay on the trails so that I can leave the woods to the wildflowers. So I wanted to show you 2 wildflowers that can be confusing. They're both very early spring wildflowers. This is Spring Beauty, and this is Hepatica. So the Hepatica has these 3-lobed leaves that are lobed almost like the lobes of a liver, which is where Hepatica, the name, comes from. These little guys, they have the guides, the veins, the pink veins in them that help guide the bees in to pollinate them. These do come in white, and these also come whiter, so that's why sometimes they're hard to tell apart. But once you get a feel for them, you'll really be able to tell the difference. I like the purple variety of this Hepatica a lot, and I like the soft fuzziness of the leaves. Often, if you don't catch these within the first 3 or 4 days of them blooming, they just go by. They drop the petals on the ground, and you've missed it. So get out there and look for your wildflowers while they're in season. So another thing I wanted to show you about hepatica, which I think is really cool, not only is it variable in color from white to lavender to deep violet, almost purple, it's variable in petal number. It's the only wildflower I know that changes the number of petals it has. This one has 6. See how symmetrical it is? This one has 7. I've seen as many as 11, 12, 13 petals on a hepatica. Here's that 3-lobed leaf from last year. You can see the fuzzy ones coming up this year, but again, this is a good way to tell this wildflower. So the reason that I've brought you to Red Rocks on this beautiful spring day is that because it's a south-facing slope, the wildflowers come out much earlier. It's warmer, the soil is warming up very quickly here after the snow melts. There's still enough moisture for the flowers to do well on this site, but it gives us a preview to what will be happening throughout the rest of the Champlain Valley in another week or so. You'll probably notice as you're out looking at wildflowers that they often occur in clumps. And there are 2 reasons for that. One is that they reproduce vegetatively, so they run rhizomes underground that create new plants. And the other one is that the main disperser of the seeds of wildflowers are ants. And they don't carry them very far. So the ants are attracted to a fatty body attached to the seed called an iliosome, and they take that home and they eat that part and they leave the seed to germinate. But the ants only on average take them 6 feet from where they find the seed to begin with. So as wildflowers try to recolonize an area that was forested and then cut and returning to forest, it takes them a long time to get there. This is my favorite patch of trout lily here in Red Rocks, and if you get a close look at it, I want you to notice that the anthers are yellow. So where the pollen is, they're yellow. But in this particular flower, they can be yellow or they can be maroon, and no one really knows why. It's called trout lily because it blooms when trout start to return upstream in Vermont, but also it has a mottled leaf. You can see the sort of purple patches on that green leaf that makes it look like a brook trout. So we've been out for a while this morning, and as the sun heats up this hillside, we can see the flowers are opening even more fully, and this one, the petals are starting to get recurved. This is a trout lily that has the kind of maroon colored anthers, the pollen bearing bodies. And I just want to say about trout lily, and like many of the wildflowers in the woods, they take many years to get established. This flower may have been just sending up a single leaf for up to 7 years before it flowers. So I have a lot of compassion for them, that they do a lot of work to exist in this world where they try to get everything done before the leaves come out on the trees. So I'd like to work with Newcomb's Wildflower Guide one more time. We did key out the trillium, and here we are faced with another set of questions about this flower. So one of the earliest things we have to decide as we go down through flower type if it's irregular or regular. And let's look at how Newcomb describes those differences. So basically we're dealing with symmetry. And in his examples he shows if it's radially symmetrical, if you can cut it in several different directions and get a mirror image, you're dealing with a regular flower. If it has a top and a bottom, then you're dealing with an irregular flower. And then the other thing that we'll get into with this particular flower is the leaf type. So the trillium was entire. It had a smooth margin on the leaf. They can be toothed, they can be lobed like the hepatica, or lobed only at the base, or they can be divided where the leaf is cut in all the way to the central stem. So again, irregular flowers, you can fold them like a book. They're symmetrical side to side, but they're not symmetrical all the way around. And this does have a top and a bottom. So we go with number 1, irregular. It is a wildflower, so this is not a shrub or a vine. And the leaves are basal only. So these leaves are all coming out straight from the ground. They're not coming off the stem of the flower. So we have a 1, a 2, and these leaves are divided. They are cut all the way to this central stalk. leaf stalk. So, so let's see, we have a 1, a 2, and a 4. So we go into the group part of the key and we find out what it tells us. So leaves are divided into narrow segments or divided into leaflets. So let's go with 34, page 34. And there we go, Dutchman's breeches. These are some of my favorite early spring wildflowers. The illusion is to having pants hanging on a clothesline, and you can really see that if you look closely. They look like they have these little pantalones, you know, on them. You can see, well, I can see that in this flower, someone has done nectar robbing. So instead of pollinating this flower like a queen bumblebee would have done, this little critter chewed a hole in it and got to the nectar without getting any of the pollen on it. So that's a strategy that some insects use. Really, plants, flowering plants and insects, they radiated and diversified evolutionarily at the same time. So they're kind of in this interesting dance with each other where the plants want to provide food, but they also want to be pollinated and have their seeds dispersed, whereas the insects are just really after the food. So if they can get it in a different way, they'll try to figure that out. This plant is a true ephemeral. It has these really soft, feathery, cut leaves that in a month or two will just be gone. Like the whole plant you'll just won't even know that it's been here. So it comes and goes in that early window in late April, early May. What these flowers are up to with this strategy is they're trying to get all of the sunlight before the trees leaf out. So if we look up into the canopy, we can see that we aren't in the shade really. We don't have leaves covering us, and neither do the plants. And so it's kind of a unique opportunity for them to grab it all and go to town with it. So we just stopped for a minute to notice the flies and bees that are pollinating these bluets and early saxifrage. These are two other wildflowers that you find in these rocky environments, and you can just see how useful they are to these insects who are looking for pollen and nectar wherever they can find it this time of year. So we've talked a little bit about when to look for wildflowers, and here in the Champlain Valley, that's anywhere from the end of April through the middle of May. Wildflowers have a strategy. They're perennials. They have a lot of nutrients stored in their underground parts, and they just burst up out of the ground, and they put their foliage on, they put their flowers on, they fruit, all in a very short window of time. A lot of them basically spend their life 10 months underground. So early May is usually a good time here. As you go higher up in elevation, of course, that gets a little bit later. But where do you look for wildflowers? So we found them in the Champlain Valley in a pattern, and I want to talk to you about that. So the individual wildflowers tend to occur, these woodland ephemerals occur together in the same place, and I want to talk about why that is. So let's look at a bedrock geology of Vermont. This is way too much information for your purposes if you're just going out to look at wildflowers, but notice that there's striping in this map, and essentially we're looking at the rumpled bottom of an ocean when continents collided and Vermont was created 500 million years ago. So let me show you another map though. The pattern of striping in this map is that there's blue and there are other colors. And the blue is where the ocean edge was, and there were lots of calcium deposited in that area. And it's these calcium-rich areas where the pH of the soil is high that you will find the wildflowers. So if you've enjoyed being out in the woods today, and maybe you know some young people, if you teach or you have kids of your own, or you know you're an aunt or uncle, and you want to take them into the woods, I want to show you a great trick for doing that. You can go out yourself and start to identify the wildflowers and find them along a trail near your house, and then get a wildflower coloring book. This is a really nice one. It's kind of vintage, but you can find this online. It's the Peterson Guide to Wildflowers. And then what I do when I'm working with groups of kids is I cut and paste, I copy and paste the flowers that I've seen, so I can make a scavenger hunt for Red Rocks Park. It's been a really lovely time walking with you out here at Red Rocks, and I just want to give a shout out to a couple of flowers that are among my favorites that we did not encounter here today, but they're out there in the woods, so go and look for them yourself. One of them is called bloodroot. This has gone by. This is from my yard. Again, I try not to ever pick wildflowers in their wild habitat, but I do have some that I have grown that are doing quite nicely in my yard. It has a root that when you open it almost looks like a wound, but the flower is this beautiful. The red-orange sap indicates that it's in the poppy family, so it's related to the Dutchman's breeches that we saw earlier today. But I do want to mention also something that is a wild edible. It's the ginger. It's not related to the ginger that we buy in the store, but it does have I wish you could smell it, this beautiful gingery, peppery odor to its root. And people, settlers in Vermont did use it to spice things like cookies. Again, don't take it from the wild, but if you have access to it in someone's garden, feel free to check that out. The last thing I want to mention is blue cohosh, really interesting flower its petals have become the nectar-bearing part of the flower. They're like these little sticky landing pads that the bees and flies come to. And the last tip that I want to give you is that if you're familiar with iNaturalist, or even if you're not, you can go on there and put a species name in, and it will show you where it's been seen in your area. And if you can find where wild ginger is listed, you will find other wildflowers there as well, because they do tend to associate in rich northern hardwoods, and you'll find more than one species on a site. I wanted to add one other flower to our list of some of my favorites, and that is the miterwort. And the beautiful thing about that to me is the flower itself, which looks like a snowflake. I mean, it got its name because some people thought that looked like a bishop's cap, a mitre. But I think when you look at it, it looks either like a sea anemone or a snowflake. So take a good close look at that if you find that in your woods. So thank you for coming with us on this wildflower walk to Red Rocks Park. Again, we chose this location because it's warm, it's sunny, it has these calcium-rich rocks, and that's where you find the wildflowers the earliest this time of year. But go find what's in your woods. Look on these limestone, marble, dolomite, rocky ridges, and try to find places where there's some sunshine, and you should have some pretty good luck.